So you guys know me as somebody who talks a lot about frugality. I live a pretty frugal existence at this point, but it wasn't always that way. Just a few years ago, I was struggling with a lot of debt and it was really weighing me down and holding me back. Today, I want to talk about 5 key things that I did to get out of that situation and to change my financial future for the better. Let's get into it. If you don't know me, I'm Spencer, and I like to talk about simple living, frugality, and ways to cut down on your technology usage, sometimes through the use of other technologies. So, to briefly tell you my story, back in 2019, I had just graduated from a postgraduate diploma in film and television production, and I started working in the film industry. This was kind of a big leap for me. I was in my mid 20s and I decided to do a career change. I didn't really know what I was going to do before that, but I knew I wanted to do something a little bit more creative and I wanted to have a little bit more control over my hours. I didn't want to do a standard 9 to 5. I wanted to have a little bit more freedom in when I took work and when I didn't. So I started in this industry that is largely freelance and contract based. As a freelance contractor, you need to have a pretty robust network of contacts and jobs in order to remain employed and to make a decent amount of money. And when I graduated, I had very little of any of that. I had an internship with a director of photography who I later went on to work with quite a bit. But at that time, it was just a few jobs here and there, and I was on my own largely to find other things to fill in the gaps. After less than 6 months of working in the industry full time, March of 2020 happened, and everything stopped. I didn't have any work for about 6 months after the fact. At that point, I also moved from the small town I was living in to the city in order to be closer to work and to have more time to network with people and find more work. But that also meant taking on a newer and more expensive place that cost me a lot of money that I didn't yet have. So during the end of 2020 and into 2021 and the beginning of 2022, I basically just tried to find as many jobs as I could, but I was kind of burning money all the time. I was spending my money not super wisely. I wasn't really getting a lot of money to replenish it from my work, and I was slowly creeping farther and farther into debt on my credit card. By 2022, though, things came to a head. I had like $11,000 of student loan debt from that postgraduate diploma, and my credit card wasn't too far from that either. I had a $13,000 credit card limit or something at that time, and I was pretty close to maxing it out almost all the time. During the various lockdowns that we had in Canada, I would just end up eating up the little bit of savings that I had and then having to cover the rest of my cost using debt. But by 2022, I had pretty much maxed out that debt option, and I was honestly quite scared because I didn't know how I was going to cover my cost of living and my payments. There was one night in early 2022 that I'm honestly never going to forget. It was a completely sleepless night where I was tossing and turning and I just couldn't turn my brain off because I was just so scared about how I was going to cover all of these costs. It was honestly one of the lowest points of my life, and I'd never want to feel that way again. But honestly, guys, it was in that lowest moment, in that fear, that pain, that I came to this resolve that I said, I'm not going to stop until I clear this debt. I don't ever want to feel this way again. I don't want to have another sleepless night like this of uncertainty. I'm going to be certain of one thing, and that is that I'm going to do everything possible to clear this debt and change my financial future. And that very next morning, I started making these changes. So let's get into what those were right now. So the first thing that I did was a mindset change, and that was really just getting motivated and determining why I wanted this. Now, of course, you could say that your why was just, well, why? I just don't want to be in debt. It sucks. I think it needs to be a little bit more powerful than this. Of course, being in debt sucks and nobody wants to be in debt, but you need to have a more powerful why. When I was laying in bed and I felt this kind of impending doom that like I was ruining my life through these choices and that I needed to do whatever I could to get out of this debt. That's where the why really came to me. Like I had gotten into the film industry because I wanted freedom, right? I wanted to be able to have freedom from the 9 to 5. I wanted to be able to choose and determine my own life a little bit more. But so far, I'd kind of failed at that. I was really just in a huge amount of debt and I had no certainty as to where my income was coming from. And I had the freedom, but I also was failing with that freedom. So it really got me fired up. And I wanted the freedom to be able to pursue things like this, like YouTube, things that were interesting, things that I was passionate about, but I wasn't going to be pursuing that if I was constantly scared, constantly being held back of where my next little bit of money was going to come from to cover my cost of living. It sounds a bit extreme, but when I was at that lowest point, it felt like I'd been told I was dying. None of the junk I had around me, none of the things that I'd blown all my money on over those years seemed to matter anymore. And I just wanted out. I just wanted to go back. And at that point, I had my why locked. I wanted that debt gone and I was going to do anything to get rid of it. So the second thing that I immediately did to change my financial future at that time was I immediately stopped all unnecessary spending. I cut everything that I could. I cut any and all spending on entertainment. I basically didn't allow myself to have anything fun to have. At that time, my entertainment was basically watching the debt go down. And that was what I spent all my time focusing on. I also got creative with cutting my costs as well. I knew I needed to have a big data plan for my phone so I could do editing jobs while I was traveling for work. But then I thought that I don't really need my Wi-Fi then because I have enough data to cover both of those expenses and I don't use a lot of Wi-Fi when I'm actually home. So I cut my Wi-Fi and ended up saving, I think, 60 bucks a month just by doing that. I cut a lot of other things as well, and I tried to not let myself be bothered by it. I knew these changes didn't have to be permanent, and if they were extreme, they only really had to be for a certain amount of time as I put my nose to the grindstone and hammered this debt out. Now, the third thing that I did to change my financial future at that time was I started to eat like a hobo. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I'm not trying to say I eat like a modern homeless person. I'm not trying to be rude about it. I'm trying to say that I ate like the historical hobos that I looked up to. I ate a lot of canned goods and a lot of very simple old-timey dishes. Cans of beans became my staple during that time. Like no-name versions of like Heinz beans, those maple baked beans or any sort of thing like that. I wasn't a cook at that time. I really didn't care about cooking from scratch and I didn't want to get into learning at that time. So I just bought the cheapest canned goods that I could find, canned tuna, maybe canned mushrooms, canned beans, and I would mix them all together and eat them. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't good eating at that time really, but it was a good way to eat very cheap. Of course, there was bonus points if you were able to find the canned goods that were on sale, and I did that as well, but I just tried to focus on eating the cheapest things that I could find. Another huge way which I was able to save costs during this time was I took a lot of food home from work that was getting wasted and I was able to eat for free a lot of the time. In the film industry, meals are often provided to crew because we work such long hours, there's really not time to make that for ourselves. Oftentimes these meals are great, they're big hearty meals, but a lot of it goes to waste. So what I started to do was I asked the craft service people, the people who provided the food to us, the caterers as well, if any of this stuff was going to be getting thrown out at the end of the day, any large batches of food which wasn't consumed, if I could take it home with me. And honestly, everyone that I asked about this was elated and they were happy to provide me with that stuff and not see the food go to waste. So pretty soon my freezer was full of soups and stews, bacon and sausage from our breakfasts, and more. It's also common if we go into overtime beyond 12-hour days that a second meal is provided to the crew, and usually that's something like pizza. But the thing is that not a lot of people want to eat a pizza at like midnight when we're working super late and everybody just wants to go home. So a lot of that pizza doesn't end up getting eaten either. So during that time on 2022, I was doing occasional work on a show and we worked a super long day and there was like 5 boxes of pizza left over at the end of it all. So I checked with the production and at the end of the shoot day, I took like 2 huge boxes of pizza home with me. I put them all into freezer bags and then I froze them. And for the next month and a half, I was eating frozen pizza, just heating it up in my oven and enjoying it at different times when I wanted a treat. Now I know most of you don't work in the film industry and perhaps your meals aren't provided by your employer. That is a unique situation, but you also probably have other unique situations that I don't have access to that you maybe aren't utilizing in your own life. So take a look around, assess your current situation, and see if there's any creative solutions that you can come up with to help lower your food costs. And just circling back to the original point about eating a lot of canned goods, you can accomplish a lot of that cutting your grocery cost rather than going to canned processed foods by eating a lot of from scratch meals, a lot of simple staple things like beans and like rice and cheaper produce that's on sale. You're able to do that. Even stuff like flour as well. Just making all of your meals from scratch can really cut your costs as well. That's something that I wish I did at that time, but I just didn't take the time to really like learn those skills of cooking for myself. It's something that I've gotten a lot better over the years, but at that time it really wasn't as much of a consideration. I was just trying to do the cheapest things possible and the easiest things possible to lower my expenses, but you could definitely do it in a smarter way than I did, believe me. So moving on to the fourth thing that I did to change my financial future during this time was I really made an intense effort to find extra work. As I mentioned, working in the film industry is a freelance contract-based gig, and you have to have a decent network of people that can hire you in order for you to have a good amount of work that pays you pretty well. Because I was still relatively new in my career, I still didn't have a ton of contacts. At least I wasn't really in a lot of people's regular call list. People just kind of forget about you if you haven't worked with them for a little while. And if they have regular people, they're going to call those people back first. But sometimes they do need to replace somebody. Somebody's not available and they need to find somebody to fill in. So what I started doing at that time was just hitting up any person that I had worked with in the past, even if it had been a year or so ago. And I just started getting my name back in their heads once again. What I would do is just send them a text or give them a phone call, let them know that I was available to work and would be happy to work if they had any gaps that they needed filled. For most of the people that I contacted, they already had other people to fill in those blank spots for them. But for a few people, they were actually looking for someone and they were able to hire me for those jobs. I was able to score a job during that time on a show that was going for like 3 months, a studio show indoors during that kind of early winter spring here in Canada, where there's not a lot of outdoor shows happening. And I was able to get this gig that went on for multiple months full time. But I didn't stop there because I still had the weekends available to myself and I wanted to make a lot of money so I could pay this debt down. So I started finding any one-day jobs that were happening on the weekend. In the film industry, these are a little bit more few and far between, but there's independent things and music videos and stuff that do sometimes shoot on the weekend. So I took whatever was available to me and I tried to work 6 or 7 days a week as much as I could. So obviously in my case, it's helpful that I wasn't a salaried person and that I was able to get more money by putting in more time at my work. But if you're currently working a salary job and you're not really able to make any more money by putting in extra time, it doesn't really work like that for you, then perhaps look into something like a side hustle. Now, a side hustle doesn't have to be some crazy side business you thought of. It could just be taking some gig work or getting a second job that you do nights or on the weekends. Obviously, this isn't really a fun way to go. I wasn't having a lot of fun working like 80 hours a week during this time, but it was something that I knew was going to pay off in the future, literally. You just have to remember that it's going to be a short-term thing. It may kind of feel like a nightmare while you're in it, but you're doing that so you can wake up from the bad dream of being in so much debt and coming out to financial freedom on the other side. So lastly, the fifth and final thing that I did to really change my financial future during this time was I started selling everything like crazy. Seriously, anything that wasn't strapped down in my house or too heavy for me to move, I put it up for sale and I got it out of there. Now you may hear this and think, well, I don't really have anything to sell. It's worth anything. Like I like the stuff that I have. I don't want to get rid of it. I kind of felt that way as well. But when I was at that rock bottom, that low point, tossing and turning, trying to fall asleep and not being able to, I decided at that point that I was willing to sell whatever I had to help get rid of this debt as quick as I could. And a lot of the stuff that I sold during this time, I really didn't want to sell, but I wanted to get out of debt more than I wanted that item, so I chose to sell it anyway. I figured that I could probably get something like it back in the future once I had my debt paid off and I could afford to actually own that item, so I decided to get rid of it in the meantime to clear that debt. I got rid of things like camera equipment, a record player that I had, just other things that I wasn't really using, but I sold some big ticket items as well. Two of the things that hurt the most was I had got a camper van a couple of years before that, a really good deal on kind of a beat up Chevrolet van that I had traveled around with in 2020 and 2021. I had to sell that thing. I knew that it was worth a little bit more money at that point because the car market was just kind of like it was, and I knew that it was going to clear a big chunk of that debt if I decided to sell it. So I listed that thing for sale and I got like 6 grand for it, which was a huge way to pay off some of that debt. That like got rid of a quarter of the debt right away. Another big ticket item which I sold during that time, which I still think about and long for quite often, was my white Gibson Flying V guitar. I got this guitar from my brother, who bought it back in like 2008 from a Guitar Center in the States for like $500. This guitar, it wasn't like perfect. It had been changed. The pickups inside had been changed out. I'm not going to really get too much into the guitar specifics. I loved that guitar. I played it a lot. But over the time that I owned it, it had appreciated in value quite a bit. And during that time, I sold it to somebody out in Montreal for $1,600. During that time, I estimate I sold about $10,000 worth of stuff just by selling those two big ticket items plus a lot of different small things that really added up to paying almost half of the debt off immediately from that one source. And folks, that's a huge tip that I think that you need to utilize if you're in debt and you want to get out of it fast. Whether it's selling a bunch of small items just to give you a few $100s to put something toward that debt that you're not able to now, or it's selling some bigger ticket items that right now you couldn't even imagine selling, but that could really do a huge number on clearing that debt fast. If you have a car that you're still paying on that's worth a lot more money than you actually have, then potentially you should sell that car and get something a lot cheaper, pocket the money and put that toward the debt. I'd say if you have anything in your life that is valuable, not an immediate need and also not like family related sentimental, then you should get rid of it. Because if you want to get rid of that debt truly bad enough, then there should be no possession that is worth holding on to that debt for. So sell anything and everything you can. That was the biggest thing that I did during that time. And folks, those are the 5 things that I did to change my financial future. By putting all of these 5 things into practice, in less than 6 months of doing this, I was able to clear the $20,000+ of debt that I had accumulated over the past couple years prior. And I will say this was not an easy road. It was a very stressful and then tiring part of my life, but I was motivated throughout the entire thing to see that number go down to 0 and to find a little bit of financial peace in my life. And if you are feeling stuck in your life, if you feel like you can't turn around your financial future, if you have a lot of debt in your life that you would love to see gone, that's keeping you awake at night like it was for me, then I would just say you have to do everything that you can to turn that around. If you think you're doing everything you can, maybe you haven't thought of everything. Maybe you should take one more look at that and see if there's any other creative solutions that you can come up with to make that change happen and make it happen fast. I hope you found this video interesting. I'm going to link a bunch of resources in the description that I found very valuable during that time. Things that kept me motivated, books that I was reading, people that I was listening to, channels on YouTube that I was watching that helped keep me motivated and excited, and that kept me walking that line to financial freedom and paying off debt. Let me know in the comments section if you've had any similar experiences around debt and paying off debt to change your financial future. I'd love to hear from you if so. If you're currently dealing with some debt in your life, but you're doing whatever you can to try to pay that off, let me know in the comments section and keep fighting the good fight. Thanks very much for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.